Welcome back, people. We are getting ready to dive into another episode, and this time the professor is going to speak to us about one of my favorite places, ancient Egypt. Ah, that Egypt. Those guys, I guess it was already interesting enough. But then when they got to the 25th dynasty, oh my goodness. Two brothers, literally two brothers, both kings, left their home, marched down to Egypt, had to had to tighten some people up, and just took over the place. It was crazy, y'all. But let's see if he can enlighten me more so than I already am. You can always go back and learn something else if you take another look, even if you already consumed that information. So, let's go down this rabbit hole.
Egyptian history is dominated by the Nile. A large population was concentrated in the delta in the north, where the river empties into the Mediterranean. Outlying areas, desert with some oases, were populated sparsely. By ancient standards, Egypt was a rich land, the land proverbially flowing with milk and honey. The river rose every year, depositing fertile mud and water over the croplands. The shallows of the delta abounded in fish and small game. The ancient Egyptians seem to have been a people who concentrated on enjoying the benefits of life rather than war. The Nile flows from the south to the north. It flows from Nubia, modern day Sudan, and empties into the Mediterranean. The civilization along the Nile was geographically long and narrow. Cultural influences and differences exist along the axis of the river. The Egyptians themselves distinguished between north and south. They called their country the Two Lands, a union of northern and southern territories. Seth, the god of the south, and Horus, the god of the north, who had their differences as well, reflect this geopolitical reality. We also observe that Egypt is located in the continent of Africa. African influences traveled along the Nile from the south to the north. Cultural influences could travel in both directions, and over the long course of Egyptian history, Ethiopians too enjoyed a period of domination. Despite these potential paths of cultural influences, for much of Egyptian history, ancient Egyptians were relatively isolated. Desert and sea tended to keep invaders away. Before the advances of modern Egyptology, beginning in the early 1800s, knowledge about ancient Egypt was derived from the classical writers of Greece and Rome. The ancient Greeks acknowledged that they were themselves a young people in comparison with the Egyptians, whom they admired as the source of ancient wisdom. The Romans, too, were fascinated by Egypt.
Thank you, Professor Hahn. The Greeks and the Romans both acknowledged that they got a lot of their information, got a lot of, what's the word for it? What they learned about civilizations and how to build civilizations, they got from Egypt. And I'm not being racist, it's just the truth, it's the facts. Africa is predominantly black. In ancient times, Africa was predominantly black. The Greeks and the Romans came there to conquer, and in some battles, they got their ass whipped. not only did they get their ass kicked by a bunch of black people, on some occasions they got beat by black women. Ooh, mama don't take no mess. Man, if it's about ancient Egypt, yeah, I'm gonna stop and take a listen. See what's being said, because that's one of the greatest time periods in black history, because that was the beginning. Well, I should say that was close to the beginning. Nubia, Ethiopia, those two places, that was the beginning. And arguably Samaria, but that's a story for another day. Let's get back to the professor.
Egypt and adorned their palaces with artwork they collected in Egypt. Caesar consulted Egyptian astronomers before reforming the Roman calendar. After the Roman conquest of Egypt, however, knowledge of the ancient Egyptian hieroglyphic writing system gradually faded. And from late antiquity, for more than 1,500 years, hieroglyphs remained indecipherable. During Napoleon's attempt to conquer Egypt, however, a stone was found in 1799 near the town of Rosetta, or Rashid, that contained an inscription in 2 languages and 3 scripts, in hieroglyphs, in a less complicated Demotic Egyptian script, and in Greek. This triple inscription passed, like so many antiquities, into British hands after surrender of French forces in 1801, and today resides in the British Museum. The Rosetta Stone commemorates the accession of Ptolemy V Epiphanes to the throne of Egypt in the year 196 to 197 BCE. It was written by priests of Memphis and describes Ptolemy's benefactions to that priesthood, but more importantly, established whole lists of Greek and hieroglyph equivalents. This key provided the foundation for translating thousands of surviving texts. Egyptian literature and mythology survived mostly on papyri and ostraca, bits of pottery or limestone bearing inscriptions. Texts were also written on pyramid walls, we call them pyramid texts, and on coffins, these are coffin texts. The most famous text is the Egyptian Book of the Dead, a collection of spells written on papyri and buried with a mummified corpse. We will look at this text in some detail in a subsequent lecture. These texts have allowed scholars to recover a great deal of religious lore. These texts derive from a vast stretch of time. Prehistoric Egyptian history begins around 4,500 BCE, again with followers of Horus located in the north and followers of Seth in the south. The pharaoh thus wore a double crown that commemorated the union of these 2 regions, or the 2 lands. All administrative units were likewise doubled, despite the division religion and language served to unify. The Archaic period, which lasted from the 4th to the 3rd millennium BCE, sees advances in brick and masonry building. This is followed by the Old Kingdom, the first great age of pyramid building. Religious worship shifts from Horus to Re, the sun god, as the ancestor of the pharaohs. Which deity is considered supreme will depend, as we shall see, on contemporary politics. After the Old Kingdom dissolves into civil wars, there is a gap in the record, which we call the First Intermediate Period. The city of Thebes then emerges to dominate the country. There is more civil disruption, a Second Intermediate Period. There is foreign domination also by a mysterious group called the Hyksos. Josephus, a Jewish writer who wrote in Greek sometime in the 1st century CE, thought the Hyksos were Israelites. Whoever they were, their overthrow ushered in the New Kingdom, and we have barely arrived at the 1500s BCE. A century later, the reign of Amenhotep III institutes a monumental building program at Thebes, Luxor, Karnak, names that will be familiar and names that we will soon hear again. and Amenhotep III's son was Akhenaten, born Amenhotep IV. Akhenaten was, from a religious perspective, one of the most remarkable of all pharaohs. He had been a high priest of the sun god Re Horus at Heliopolis, but changed his name from Amenhotep, Amun is satisfied, to Akhenaten, it pleases Aten, and abolished all the old gods in favor of the sun god, Aten, who was conceived.
Ah, yes. At first, I didn't catch on how he was pronouncing it. Octon. But however you want to pronounce it, this was the first pharaoh to publicly announce that there was one God. One God. So when you read in the Bibles and you see that there's only one God, no other God but me, worship no other God but me, make no graven images, all that good stuff. The one God theory is it started here. Now a lot of people weren't happy with this, and at some point they sought to destroy this ideology. But that didn't happen. Not at all. But yeah, when he said the name, it made me think about the piece I spoke on ancient Egypt, Akhenaten, who I believe is the father of Tutankhamun. Maybe the professor speak on that, maybe not. But I just thought that was something I should mention.
Of as the visible source of life, creation, growth, and activity. Akhenaten's religious preferences meant that temple funds were diverted to the new god Aten, who then received temples, priests, and other attentions. Those who converted to Aten were rewarded, but this early attempt at monotheism did not last. After Akhenaten's death, the worship of all the old gods was revived. Akhenaten's obsession with religious affairs also weakened the country politically. We will take up monotheism again later in the course, but unfortunately not Akhenaten.
That sucks. Anyway, yes, Akhenaten. I can't pronounce it the way he said it, but Akhenaten was a pharaoh who believed in one God, the sun god, son of God. It's from my perspective, it's a play on words. The sun god, son of God. It's it's a little weird to try to explain, but I'm gonna let the professor do his thing. He probably do it way better than me. But yeah, stick around, take your little break, and I'll talk to you later.